Federalist 42, Part 3. This is paragraph 6. Attempts have been made to pervert this clause into an objection against the Constitution by representing it on one side as a criminal toleration of an illicit practice and on another as calculated to prevent voluntary and beneficial emigration from Europe to America. I mention these misconstructions not with a view to give them an answer, for they deserve none, but a specimen of manner and spirit in which some have thought fit to conduct their opposition to the proposed government. He's talking about all these people that are criticizing us about this last paragraph that I read. And remember, from part 2 of this Federalist, it had to do with the issue of importation of slavery. He says, just look at our critics. Some of them are totally against this horrible thing of slavery, and some are saying that we'll never be able to create a union if you do away with slavery. And he says, I don't want to explain this anymore because I've already told you how I feel about it in the last paragraph, but I want you to see that we've had to make compromises because that's how people are. That's how people in this 13 states are. Views could be totally different. So when we went to Philadelphia, we had to make compromises to come up with this new constitution for you because we wanted to be practical, pragmatic. Okay, he continues, the powers included in the third class are those which provide for the harmony and proper intercourse among the states. Remember, he started the paper by saying, we're going to talk about the classes, the groups of rights that were given to the federal government. So here it says the third group of rights and authority and responsibility that was given to the federal government is to regulate commerce between the states. Under this head might be included the particular restraint imposed on the authority of the states and certain powers of judicial department. By the former are reserved for a distinct class, and the latter will be particularly examined when we arrive at the structure and organization of the government. It says part of it that will have to do with the judiciary and judges and things like that. He says we will talk about that later on. I shall confine myself to a cursory review of the remaining powers comprehended under this third description. He says, I'm going to give you a brief view of some of these powers that would fall in this third group of powers given to the federal government. To wit, to regulate commerce among the several states and the Indian tribes, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of a foreign coin, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the current coin and securities of the United States, to fix the standards of weights and measures, to establish an uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws of bankruptcy, to prescribe the manner in which the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of each state shall be proved and the effect they shall have in other states, and to establish post offices and post roads. He says the rest of this Federalist paper, I'm going to be talking about what I just said in this paragraph. Minting coins, that gives a nation sovereignty. That's usually a sign of sovereignty when you can mint coins. He says we don't want every state to print paper money. We want to have a uniform system of weights and measure. We want the federal government to be in charge of minting coins, not every state. And then, as I've said in some of these Federalists in the past, states were issuing paper money that had become worthless and that was damaging the credit and credibility of the United States, of the government of all the states. And that was one big, huge problem. That was one of the reasons that they wanted to write this new constitution, so that there is uniformity in application of the laws, so that they will be able to count on if they asked for somebody's records, whether it's a criminal record or whether it's a transaction record. Let's say somebody bought and sold property somewhere else. If they wrote to that state and asked to see whether this transaction had happened, they wanted something, a record to come to them that they could trust. Because if you can't have that trust, then government is not going to be able to do its job. People won't plan on spending anything. People won't invest in anything because they say, well, we don't know what's going to happen. If I buy this thing, I don't know if tomorrow, if I move from this state, other states are going to honor this purchase or not, honor that I am actually the owner. So he says the rest of this paper, we're going to be talking about all of these because we need uniformity in all of these laws. So I'm just going to read the rest of this back to back, and if there's any place that I need to make a point or explain something to you, I guess I will. Hang on. We're going to continue with the defect of power in the existing confederacy to regulate the commerce between its several members is the number of those which have been clearly pointed out by experience. To the proofs and remarks which former papers have brought into view on this subject. Let me read this again. To the proofs and remarks which former papers have brought into view on this subject, it may be added that without this supplemental provision, the great and essential power of regulating foreign commerce would have been incomplete and ineffectual. A very material object of this power was the relief of the states which import and export through other states from the improper contributions levied on them by the latter. Were these at liberty to regulate the trade between state and state, it must be foreseen that ways would be found out to load the articles of import and export during the passage through their jurisdiction with duties which would fall on the makers of the latter and the consumers of the former. So he says, if we don't regulate commerce, when these different things pass through different states, every state might just go ahead and levy some taxes on it, and everybody's going to suffer because there is no uniformity in this transaction. If you decide to take something from the southern states all the way to the northern states, if every state wanted to add a tax, then by the time it would get to the northern states, they feel like they're going to be cheated, they're paying too much, and then they'll try to do the same thing to the southern states, and before you know, there will be a lot of distrust between these states. We may be assured by past experience that such a practice would be introduced by future contrivances, and both by that and a common knowledge of human affairs, that it would nourish unceasing animosities and not improbably terminate in serious interruptions of the public tranquility. To those who do not view the question through the medium of passion or of interest, the desire of the commercial states to collect in any form an indirect revenue from their uncommercial neighbors must appear not less impolitic than it is unfair, since it would stimulate the injured party by resentment as well as interest to resort to less convenient channels for their foreign trade. But the mild voice of reason, pleading the cause of an enlarged and permanent interest, is but too often drowned before public bodies as well as individuals by the clamors of an impatient avidity for immediate and immoderate gains. He says, we have seen from experience, from what human beings do, is that just because human beings can be greedy, they want to make as much money as possible. So before you know it, they just keep on adding taxes to these things, and this will create animosity between seller and consumer, between people from different states, because they feel like they've not been treated well, they've not been treated fairly, and this will eventually lead to huge distrust between people of different states, and before you know it, that will lead to holding grudges, and any little thing can cause wars between these states. And then we will be so weak because we'll be spending all our energy and money on raising armies to fight one another, that the Europeans can come and take advantage of us and take our resources and keep us weak and desperate.